2024 is coming to an end, but before it does, we wanted to take a look back to see just how good of a year it was for Pokémon Go. So join us as we jump into our 2024 Pokémon Go Year in Review. Welcome back, everyone. So for the past few years, we've ended our year on the channel by doing a year in review for Pokémon Go. We've discussed the positives that we've seen, the negatives we've seen, and some stuff that we'd hope for in the new year. So let's just get right into it. 2024 was an interesting year for Pokémon Go. I definitely wouldn't say it's as bad as 2023 was, but it didn't really feel great. Chris, what do you think about 2024?
Yeah, I agree with that. We had a lot of ups and downs. We'll obviously talk about events and raids and some other aspects, but I would agree that the year was stronger than 2023, but there were definitely some stinkers in there. So let's start off with looking at the good of 2024, good events, raids, and some other things. So let's look at it.
Yeah, let's get into it. So in terms of good events this year, we did have some really good standout ones that I thought were pretty great. The first one that comes to mind is the Sizable Surprises event. This was a pretty great event because it focused on the release of the XXL and XXS Pokemon, which was a feature that was relatively unused up to that point. You know, it was pretty random, didn't really have a full wide release. And the fact they featured both Wailmer as a really big Pokemon with a boosted shiny rate, as well as Wimpod as a new shiny with the opposite version was really cool.
Yeah, this was also great just to stockpile Pokemon for different showcases. There were obviously a lot of every Pokemon of one type showcases that would happen throughout the year. And so with things like Wailmer being great for the largest water type showcases and Onix being great for the largest ground type. So that was really cool. And overall, I thought it was just a really fun event.
Yeah, for sure. Another big event that I thought was really great this year was Weather Week. This event was mostly focused around the cast form, different variants, and they all had boosted shiny rates. But another big part about it was the Stardust bonus. You got twice the Stardust when catching weather boosted Pokemon, which one of those Pokemon was Paris, which is already boosted. So if you had rainy or sunny weather and you found one, you were getting 1,250 Stardust per catch, which is really nice right out the gate for a common spawn.
Oh yeah, it was definitely one of the best events this year in terms of collecting Stardust. You'd obviously have some like spotlight hours and community days, but the fact that this was a multi-day event with boosted Stardust and things like Paris spawning, it was great for replenishing my Stardust supply.
Yeah, it really encouraged me to go out and look for those Paris, while the event was happening. And also having the boosted cast form, which is a Pokemon that really isn't available in a lot of events. Plus we got the snowy cast form, though that one was locked behind field research tasks, so a little more difficult to get that one. But if you needed the sunny form, the regular form, or the rainy form, they were pretty out and about.
Yeah, and we had a few more good events throughout the year. Rivals Week was a nice one with some returns of rarer regionals, which was really nice. You had things like Heatmore and Zangoose for us in the Western Hemisphere, and then people in the Eastern Hemisphere had things like Seviper and Durant spawning, so that was really cool. And they also had some boosted shiny rates. And then we also had the Legendary Heroes event last season in the Max Out season that provided some pretty interesting spawns, but I think the really cool part about it was that you could evolve Coughing into Galarian Wheezing, something that we haven't seen since the season of Alola, where we could evolve Execute and Cubone into their Alolan counterparts. So I know I'd like to see a lot more like that.
Yeah, for sure. Though that was a really great event, and I'm really bummed I didn't have any Shadow Coughing at the time to evolve, but it's really nice that they're doing more of those, and I really hope they do more in 2025 and beyond. And then the last big event we had for 2024 that we thought was good was Go Fest. This event was really well-rounded. I feel like it was much better than some of the previous Go Fest, like 2022. And really the whole event was just, refreshing. It was fun. It was nice to get out and go. The only thing I wasn't really a fan of with the event was the shiny rates for Necrozma, which felt a little low compared to what they usually are. I mean, the group we were in had like 30 or 40 people, and after doing like 20 or 30 raids, like only a handful of people got shinies, so something felt a little off there. Like it definitely should have been more shiny Necrozmas about, but besides that, it was a pretty good event.
Yeah, obviously we did our Go Fest review and we put this year's Go Fest in second place, I believe, and I stand by that. I thought it was a really strong event, and with all the Ultra Beasts and Necrozma and its fusion forms debuting, I think it made for a really strong event. And kind of the funny thing, when you talk about the shiny rates for Necrozma, we're actually recording this on the day of Necrozma's Fusion Raid Day. So hopefully, knock on wood, we have some better luck with shiny rates today.
Yeah, I really hope we get a lot of shinies from that event. And speaking of raids, there were also some really good raid bosses released this year that we want to talk about. And first off, I want to talk about, we got the remaining Ultra Beasts. We got Stakataka, Blacephalon, and Poipole through a seasonal research, so that was nice to knock out the rest of the Ultra Beasts that way.
Oh yeah.
We also had Necrozma and its fusions released for GoFest, which we just talked about. This was a really hype Pokemon that people have been waiting for to come to Go, and having it released through GoFest was really exciting, and it's really awesome to have those in the game, especially now that we have Dawnwings and Duskmane Necrozma available as well.
Yeah, they're some of the strongest Pokemon in the game right now, so it's really cool to see them, achieve such heights in Go. And, following Go Fest, we had the Max Out season that was all focused on Galar Pokemon, and that's a lot of good shiny releases, in terms of legendaries at least. We had, obviously, Zacian and Zamazenta finally get their debut after years of being in the game. The Galarian Regis that we saw debut last year finally got their shiny release, and we even got the shiny Galarian Birds, who obviously weren't in raids, but it's nice to finally have them, and they also don't flee on daily incense, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, it was nice to get all the Gen 8 legendaries this year as shiny, which is really cool. But along with that, we also had multiple raid days. In particular, in 2024, we had primal raid days for both Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre. And this was the first time they've really been available since their initial release during the Hoenn Tour. We did have them for a little bit in the summer of 2023 leading up to GoFest, but having them for a full raid day where they were available for 3 hours so you could farm up primal energy as well as get shinies of these Pokemon was really great. And I feel like it was great if you missed out on those the first time around.
Oh yeah, it was one of the best times to farm energy for those. I know I've got several thousand now from that raid day alone. And speaking of primals, or more specifically megas, one of the ultra unlocks that we had this year was a Mega Lucario raid day, which I think was probably one of the strongest events we've had this year, just in terms of single day events. Obviously, Mega Lucario was really anticipated, being arguably the best fighting attacker, but it also got a brand new move in the form of Force Palm that made it even better. So we both had a lot of fun on that raid day, and I'm sure a lot of other people did too.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And it's great that they took this Pokemon that was it's a fan favorite, it was extremely hyped for it to release, and to get it as a raid day where they're all available, as well as with a boosted shiny rate and a brand new move, was all really exciting. Now, the last thing I want to talk about with the good of 2024, there were a couple big things that happened that I feel like Niantic does deserve a pat on the back for. And the first thing was, I feel like they had really great customer service with the community, and that was with the Ultra Beast backgrounds during GoFest, as well as the Makeup Lucario raid day. Basically, during GoFest, during the first, I want to say, I don't even know how long it was like 12 hours or something like that?
I believe so.
Yeah, during like the initial hours of GoFest, the Ultra Beast you were raiding didn't have access to their backgrounds with the Ultra Wormholes. So that was really unfortunate for people that were dumping a lot of remote passes in and weren't getting those. So fortunately what Niantic did was they took the amount of remote raids you did for each legendary or each Ultra Beast you had during that event, and they gave you timed research encounters that were good for I think it's like a year and a half when they were released. And they basically gave you free encounters with these Pokemon with their background. So that was pretty cool. I think I did 1 Xurkitree and 2 Necrozma, so I still have one of those Necrozma in my storage. I may actually try to redeem it today to see if it gets the boosted shiny rate once the event starts. So fingers crossed about that.
That's actually a really great idea, and I think I'll do the same because I also have a Necrozma sitting here waiting that I haven't redeemed yet. So that was a really great makeup that we had. And speaking of makeups, we also had a makeup for the Mega Lucario raid day, where some of the earlier regions, I believe it was, the ticketed bonuses that you could buy were not applying a few hours after 5 p.m. local time, despite them promising that it would go for several hours afterwards. So them providing a nice makeup day for those regions was really nice.
Yeah, that was really nice, and again, really showed great customer service and, support for the community. And then the last big feature for 2024, and this was an absolute game changer when it came to raids, was the raid attendance shared with friends feature that was introduced during the wild area back in November. So basically what this feature does is if you go through your friends list and someone's doing a raid, you can see that raid show up on your screen, and then you have an option to join remotely to that raid, which is really simple, for an addition of inviting the 5 people that you can normally do. So, if you invite 5 people and then, there's people online that want to raid, but, they didn't get your invite, they can scroll through their friends list, see you're doing the raid, and then hop in so you can get an additional person out of it, which is really nice.
Absolutely. I know there's lots of friends of mine who would always message me saying, oh, send me some raid invites on this raid day. And, I wouldn't always remember to do so. And now I can send them to whoever. And if any of my friends just want to join the raid, they can do that from the friends list. So that and a lot of other quality of life changes that they had throughout this year and also some last year were just really nice to see. And I think it encapsulates a lot of the good that Niantic had this year.
It really does, considering how things were in 2023.
Absolutely. But now I think we're going to move over to the worst parts of Pokemon Go this year. There were some events, some bugs, and a lot of other aspects that we weren't a fan of. So let's get into that, starting off with the bad events.
So one that really sticks out that wasn't the best in 2024 was Adventure Week. It wasn't the worst Adventure Week we've seen. It's definitely better than some of the earlier iterations we've had, but it was a lot worse than many previous years. And I think the big part of that was all the special spawns were locked behind eggs. And I think they were in raids too, or was it just eggs?
I think it was just eggs. Probably one of the big sticking points for me on this one was that Adventure Week in 2023 was arguably one of our favorite events of the year. So to go from that, when you've had all these Pokemon spawning, Tyrant, Amora, all the Gen 4, 5, and 6 fossils, plus the classic ones, to go from that to having them all locked behind eggs, and I think also research, was a big letdown. Now, it was nice to have boosted shiny rates in eggs and research, I'll give it a plus for that. I think I would still take them spawning in the wild at full odds over that, just because it lets everybody find them a lot easier.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also want to add that in 2023, they actually gave us a half hatch bonus as one of the bonuses for the event. And this year, they didn't do anything like that. So it was really disappointing considering the main focus of this event was eggs. So again, just really disappointed that they didn't do that.
Oh, for sure. And another event that we were pretty let down by in terms of spawns was Sustainability Week, which actually had no special spawns outside of a Trubbish Spotlight Hour, which was a fun event in itself, but the fact that Sustainability Week as a multi-day event had no spawns was really disappointing. All of the special Pokemon were locked behind either eggs or walking tasks, so we were pretty disappointed by that.
Yeah, that event really frustrated me because first off, I missed out on Trubbish Spotlight Hour because I work from 1 to midnight, so I was working during that point. And apparently, all the eggs had boosted shiny rates. Apparently Trubbish was boosted during its Spotlight Hour, so if you played that event, there was a good chance you got a shiny out of it. And it's already a Stardust boosted Pokemon, so really disappointed I missed that one. And I grinded a lot to get shiny Trubbish during this event, but I didn't get anything out of it, which was really frustrating. And I went for a lot of eggs, a lot of tasks, and didn't end up with anything. So I was really disappointed.
I was the same. I was looking for that shiny Trubbish, but I didn't get it.
Another event that we weren't really a fan of is actually a more recent event, and that was the Max Out Finale event that happened at the end of November. It looks like a good event on paper, but in reality, it was a really hardcore pay-to-play event. You had the release of Galarian Corsola, but it was only locked in eggs, as well as timed research that you could buy. It had 2 exciting shinies plus 2 new Reggie shinies and raids. And again, those are raid-locked Pokemon, so between eggs and raids, there really wasn't a lot of exciting stuff with this event. Not even, bringing back the Evolute you could evolve Coughing into Galarian Wheezing with this event.
Yeah, I agree. As a finale event, it really didn't seem that great. I'll commend it for having something new with these new shinies and Galarian Corsola releasing, because most finale events are pretty bland in that they recap the whole season without doing anything new. However, everything being in eggs or raids was pretty disappointing, and I agree. I think the evolution from Coughing into Galarian Wheezing would have made a really nice return here, especially to cap off the season. Now, another event that we found pretty disappointing was Lustrous Odyssey. And now this happened shortly before the Sinnoh Tour, the lustrous orb being themed around Palkia. And this event debuted the release of the Dusk form of Lycanroc, But the disappointing part was that the specific Rockruff that could evolve in a dusk form Lycanroc was only available through eggs and raids, and it was of course a lot rarer than the other two forms, so it really just felt kind of tacked on and a bit scammy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And then rounding out our list of, not so great events this year, I would include all the Ultra Unlocks minus the Raid Day for Mega Lucario, the Go Bigger event, which was a really poor rollout of the G-Max starters, and then probably the worst for the year was the Old and Wise event. This is just an egg and raid pay-to-play event. Like, there's no wild spawns, it's got a decent pool of Pokemon to hunt, but the execution was poor and just encapsulated the worst of Pokemon Go for this year.
I can definitely agree with that. There were a lot of events and Pokemon released that were locked behind raids and eggs, and that's exactly what this event was. Now, at the time of recording this, we have not played the holiday event either part, but based on the news we've received, both Part 1 and Part 2 of the holiday event do seem rather mediocre, with not many new Pokemon and shinies being locked behind raids, and the same with some of the costumes. So while there is some good to it with Costume Wooloo, it's not looking like a strong event overall.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Now, moving on from events, we do have a couple bad things about the raids that were from this year. And first, I will say the origin forms of Dialga and Palkia were great to be released, especially with their new moves, but the treatment of their moves was not too great. Not being guaranteed one of those moves, or like having a low chance of getting one from raids if you're raiding the one that you don't have the path for, was a bit frustrating. And then that was even more amplified with the Into the Wild event that happened at the end of November. Because with that event, there wasn't a way to get a guaranteed either one of these moves, so if you got one that was either shiny or had the background and it didn't have the move, it was kind of useless as a Pokemon, I would say.
I can definitely agree. We both had some rather frustrating instances where we got a really good IV, Dialga, or Palkia in their origin form, but they didn't get the move. In terms of Sinnoh, I got 2 perfect origin Dialga, but the issue was neither of them had Roar of Time, and more recently around the Go Wild event, I got a perfect origin Palkia that of course also didn't have the move. And Niantic's insistence on giving us no way to TM or give these Pokemon the special moves is extremely frustrating. You can't use an Elite TM to get them, nor can you find any other way to pay to give them the move. So that's something that I don't want to see going forward, and it set a really bad precedent.
Yeah, that's incredibly frustrating, and I hate to say it, but I could see Niantic probably releasing them this way for the next few years before finally giving us a chance to do that with those Pokemon. Just really frustrating to see them doing that.
Sad but true, but I can agree with that. One more thing regarding the raids that was pretty disappointing as well was that we had a lot of our Mega Evolutions this year that were all old and recycled. Now obviously we only have a few Mega Evolutions left, and we got a few in the form of raid days, including Mawile and Lucario and Heracross, which were all pretty fun, but those that we did get in the normal Mega rotations were all just more of the same. It was especially egregious, I believe it was in around March or April of this year, where we had 3 or 4 Megas who were recycled 2 months in a row. I remember having things like Alakazam 2 months in a row. Maybe it was April and May. But overall, I would say that Mega Evolution this year was treated pretty poorly.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. The Megas really weren't that exciting, and if they were in a raid rotation, I really didn't go after them as much unless I absolutely had to burn a pass that day. Besides that, I would just pass up the Megas because, they were all just not really anything exciting. Now, the next thing I want to talk about, there were a few buggy aspects from this year that I really wish Niantic fixed or implemented without them being as buggy as they were. The first buggy feature that was introduced this year was the Dynamax and Gigantamax features, and these features, they could be really exciting with their release, but I feel like releasing them in a non-complete state that they were in just really hindered their growth, their acceptance, and viability within the community.
Yeah, I've done a lot of Dynamax battles as time has gone on, and I do enjoy them, but even little things like trying to enter a Dynamax raid and the interface glitching out and kind of soft locking you out of it has been really frustrating for me, not to mention some other wider problems with Dynamax and Gigantamax as a whole, but for their big new feature this year, I wasn't very impressed with it. And another thing that I've been really disappointed with as a GBL enthusiast is the frame drops and the lag that has immensely increased. It was specifically with the Rediscover Your World update where we saw a lot of new environments and backgrounds added to both your wild screens and also your map as a whole. These new graphics caused a lot of performance issues in the GBL and PvP as a whole. And it's been going since about March or April this year, whenever that update dropped, and they really have yet to fix it. In fact, there was actually an update midway through this year that fixed these frame drops that most people were reporting at least, and they reverted that, and we haven't seen any change to it lately. So I think it's really brought down my interest in the GBL, which is upsetting because I really enjoy Go's PvP, and I think things like the Max Out update really refreshed the meta, but a lot of the bugs going on with the GBL are still hurting my interest.
Yeah, they're definitely hurting my interest in it too.
And one more thing that I was disappointed in is some of the bugs that happen with routes. Now, I'm not someone who does routes every day, but when I'm out playing, I do enjoy following routes to get some Zygarde cells to hopefully at one point get my complete Zygarde ready for the Ultra League or the Master League. The issue is that, like many of the other features in Go, routes have a lot of bugs, and one of those is just the random pausing that can happen during them. I'll hopefully show some of the footage on the screen at this point, but sometimes you'll start following a route and maybe a few feet into it, it'll start pausing and you'll have to restart the game, and that doesn't always solve it either. So I think overall with these Dynamax features, the issues with routes, and the issues with GBL and their frame drops, I think there's a lot of bugs in Go this year, arguably more than last year or past years.
I would definitely agree with that. We can't talk about the bad about 2024 without talking about the Elite Raids, and I think you can agree with this. These were handled poorly. Basically, this year we had two sets of Elite Raids. We had one in February for the release of Enamorus in a Pokemon Go, and then we have one over the summer for the return of Mega Rayquaza. First off with Enamorus, this event happened on Valentine's Day, which was Wednesday, February 14th. And these were sets of raids. I believe they happened at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, which is a decent span of times to do raids. The problem with that is for most people, they're either working during the early hours or they're trying to do stuff with their significant other during the later hours. And I don't think people want to disrupt their Valentine's Day plans, like going out to dinner and stuff, to go and do a Elite Raid.
Right. I think the scheduling for Enamorus was a real big misstep, and I think they could have made it a lot more exciting if they waited either until the following weekend or the weekend prior to just do a standard Elite Raid day. Now, obviously, I'm not a fan of Elite Raids being in person only, but I think they still would have had a lot more success. And speaking of Elite Raids not being too successful, we also had the grand return of Mega Rayquaza in the summer. Now, this is something that people were anticipating after we had the Primal Raid days earlier in the year, so we finally had word that we'd be getting Mega Rayquaza back, but it was in the form of Elite Raids, so unlike the previous Primal Raids, you couldn't remote to them, they were a lot harder, and a lot of people weren't happy with that.
Yeah, everything that I was seeing on social media about it, they either didn't have enough in their area to do, they didn't have enough trainers to beat it, and they had technical issues that prevented them from beating it, and then some people didn't even get enough energy from it to even Mega Evolve their Mega Rayquaza. So the Mega Pokemon, they can't walk to get their Mega energy until you evolve them the first time. So if you didn't get enough energy during this event, you were kind of out of luck, which some people in our group experienced.
Right, that was a huge disappointment. Now, I will say, they did rectify this. There were a lot of technical issues during the Elite Raid Day for Mega Rayquaza, so later on, as a makeup, they gave us a normal Raid Day for Mega Rayquaza, allowing you to remote to it, and that was really nice, I know you and I played it a bit both days, but the fact that we got some normal raids that you can invite people and get more help with, I thought that was a good step in the right direction.
It was, but, we can both agree, they really should have done that the first go around, or at least had Mega Rayquaza more widely available along with an Elite Raid Day. So really this just puts Elite Raids in a really bad position, and since we didn't see any for the rest of the year, it kind of makes us wonder what's going to happen with them. Like, are they going to return in 2025? Are they done at this point? We really don't know for sure, so we'll have to keep an eye out to see what happens next, because it's really interesting to see what they'll do with them.
So I also wanted to talk about the new Pokemon releases we saw this year, because we really didn't see that many. And I can understand that we aren't seeing as many Pokemon release, and shinies as well, mostly because there only are so many left. You know, we don't have the next generation of Pokemon yet, or even Legend ZA to give us some new Pokemon, so they're going a little bit slower, and I can understand that. But those that we did get came in really awkward ways. Many of them were locked behind paywalled features, be it raids or eggs, or some other ones where they were just limited. A few examples of this were Charcadet debuting only in 10-kilometer eggs, Varoom debuting in 12-kilometer eggs, Galarian Corsola, of course, being only in 7 kilometers, Toxel, once again in eggs, debuting in 10 kilometers during the Wild Area event, and you had other Pokemon that were outside of eggs, but things like Sinistea being raid exclusive, Tandemaus being party play exclusive, and really rare after its debut event. And then things like Morpeko being exclusive to the GBL, who at least was pretty common when it debuted. And then finally things like Wiglet, who is wild, but it's more of a pseudo-regional, being in specific areas around bodies of water. So overall, hearing that we would get a new Pokemon, but then once again locked behind an egg or a raid or some other method, was pretty disappointing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And it's really frustrating that most of the new Pokemon we got this year were locked behind paywall features and were otherwise limited. So unless you were a hardcore player that, had a lot of income to spend on these events, the chance of a free-to-play player getting them is pretty slim. So that was pretty frustrating to me.
Yeah. I will say that the initial release of Galar Pokemon, the starters, and I think Hatena during the Psychic Spectacular, those were at least all wild, so I'll give them a little bit of props for that, but the fact that those were the only Pokemon who had a kind of normal wild release this year was really disappointing, and I hope we see a little more of that and less of the raid and egg lock stuff next year, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in our conclusion.
For sure, for sure. Now, the last bit of negative news I want to talk about for 2024 was the misinformation and the lack of proper communication from Niantic. This has been an issue for years now, it's nothing new, but I feel like 2024, it was getting a bit more egregious with some of the mistakes they were making. In particular, we had a lot of aspects in both their released graphics as well as the info they were putting out for certain events. There was one example of this during the Simply Groundbreaking event in November, where some of their posts that they were making said that there was an increased shiny chance to get Drillbur during the event, but that wasn't in the blog post and didn't appear to be a bonus during the event. So it was frustrating that it was listed as part of Niantic's promotion of this event, but wasn't actually included.
I can agree with that, it seems like the graphics team was unaware of some of the bonuses that they were actually implementing, but they really need to finalize that stuff before they put all their information out.
They really do. And this was also present during the Wild Area event, which had multiple mistakes that really frustrated players that they didn't exactly, match up with. If you bought the $5 ticket, you were going to get 2 free raid passes each day during the event that ran for like a full week, when in reality, it was actually supposed to be 1, and they corrected that shortly after. But along with that, they also said in the initial post for the Wild Area event, that big weekend event, that if you bought a ticket, you were going to get 4 XL candy for each of the 4 and 5-star raids during that event, when in reality, they meant to only say 1, and they eventually went back and fixed that about shortly after the post went out.
Yeah, that was not a great look for them, the fact that they immediately took back 4 XL. I would think that would encourage people to do a lot of raids during the event, but alas, it just ended up being the 1. So overall, I think their lack of communication was a big drawback this year, and I hope they get better at it, but if I'm being honest, after the past few years, I'm not super optimistic. Seeing that we were talking about the Wild Area and its ticket, the last major thing we'll talk about before our conclusion is that event, seeing that it was brand new compared to Go Fest and the Go Tours, which have happened for several years.
So I'm just going to say that this wasn't on our bingo cards for 2024. We weren't expecting another Go Fest, Go Tour style event to, end the year off with. That was pretty crazy to see. To be honest with you, in terms of whether this event was too much or just right in terms of features, I kind of feel like it was a mix of both, It had some lackluster features, like with the spawns you could get, but I think the main focus were both the raids as well as Toxel and Eggs, which was a brand new Pokemon, and a new shiny Pokemon at that, so that was really a big part of it.
Right, and there was obviously the big debut of Toxtricity, its evolution in both normal raids and Dynamax battles, and of course Gigantamax battles. And this was my first successful dive into Gigantamax Pokemon. I know you had done the initial Kanto Starter Gigantamax weekend event, but this was my first time taking on the larger Gigantamax Pokemon. And while I did have a lot of fun doing it, I think the feature itself does require a bit too many people. So unless if you're in an area with a ton of people, you might not be successful. And we heard a lot of that from some people in the community. So in terms of whether I enjoyed the event overall, I did. However, I played it a lot more casually compared to something like the Go Tour or the Go Fest. I kind of think that having 3 big events in one year might be a bit too much, but I did play it without a ticket and I still enjoyed what I played of it.
I would agree with that, and I played the event casually too because I was on vacation during that time, so I didn't get a ticket. I mostly tried to focus on raids, like if there were a lot of people doing them, like while we were waiting in line for rides and stuff. I will say something cool that I did get from this event, and I'll be showing this footage on screen. I actually got a Hundo Tyrantrum in Animal Kingdom at Dino Land at Walt Disney World, which was absolutely crazy. And I didn't even know it was a hundo at the time. Like, I was lobbing Ultra Balls at it and it just kept breaking out. And I was like, oh, I'm going to lose this. And I didn't really think anything of it. But when I went to go check my hundo shortly after I caught it and it showed up, I was like, wow, I could have missed that.
Yeah, I will say Mighty Pokemon as a whole, probably for both of us, was the highlight of that event. And, you know, I think if they embrace that with this event and future ones, it could make the wild area a nice mainstay. And I'll actually be doing a video in the coming weeks on Mighty Pokemon and how they could be implemented into future events. But I will say they were easily the highlight for me, even without a ticket and, you know, not having too many Safari Balls. They were just really fun to track down and catch.
Yeah,
try to catch.
Yeah, they really were for sure. Seeing them in the wild, evolutions that you don't normally see, higher stats, higher IVs. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
So this pretty much brings us to the end of our 2024 review. Overall, I'd say there were a lot of events that, they weren't great, but they weren't bad. They were just kind of there. And to a degree, I've thought about this for a while. Pokemon Go has been out for almost 10 years now. You really can't make events that are like 10 out of 10s, 12 out of 10s every single time when you've released all these Pokemon over the years. Like, you can't keep that going, especially for long-term players, but they were just kind of there.
I can agree with that. I think we had some rather mid events is what I would call them, where, every so often you'd have one that was nice and every so often you'd have a real stinker, but overall many of them were just pretty average. And I can agree with your mindset of, at this point in the game's life, it's hard to have standout events constantly. But I will say that does make the ones that we had that were really nice, the sizable surprises and Go Fest itself, it makes those ones feel a little bit more special.
Yeah, definitely mid. And, like you said, the standout events, it made them even more standout. So I feel like that's a big part in making events that happen the entire year, Pokemon releases, raids, and all that stuff.
Right. Now, obviously, for me, the biggest drawback this year was how they treated Pokemon. We talked about that in depth, Wiglet and Toxel and Charcadet, all the Pokemon being locked behind certain methods that weren't wild. So that was probably my biggest negative takeaway this year. But I am hopeful for 2025. And speaking of which, let's get into, looking forward to next year and what we're hoping for.
So in terms of my hopes for 2025, I'm hoping that we see some new raid bosses appear. They finish off the Mega Evolutions because we're still missing Mega Metagross, Mega Mewtwo, some of the big Megas that they still need. I'm hoping that we see the Galar Paldea legendaries come to go. We see the crown forms of the 2 Sword and Shield legendaries, Zacian and Zamazenta. That would be really cool to see. And maybe even some paradoxes if they want to do that with the Paldea Pokemon. In addition to that, I'd also like to see some of the exclusive moves return for both the T5 and C-Day moves as well. They started doing that more with Lugia getting Aeroblast in November, but there's a lot more Pokemon that they've released that haven't had their moves. It would just be really exciting if they got them more often.
I can fully agree with that. I would say if at least half or maybe 30% of the legendary raids throughout the year had their exclusive move, that'd be really nice. And also having events that bring more community day moves available through Evolution would be really exciting. For me, one thing I'd really like to see in 2025 is bug fixes to make a lot of features just more fleshed out and better for the players. You know, Dynamax, we talked about a lot of the bugs and things that people don't like about them. I'd love to see them fix a lot of that to make it more enticing, especially when that's their big new feature. And also with Dynamax, I think bringing more perks to them for other engagement in the game besides just battling max battles would be really fun. You know, we obviously saw Megas get a big glow up about a year and a half after they initially released. So it hasn't been that long for Dynamax, but I do hope that they get a little more to them so we're not just using them in Dynamax battles.
2025 definitely needs to do more with Dynamax, and I really hope we see some really exciting updates coming in the new year.
Absolutely.
So guys, that brings us to the end of our year in review for 2024. And now we want to know what you guys thought about this year. Do you think it was a good year, a bad year, or just kind of a mid-year like we said towards the end? Be sure to let us know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed this year in review and want to see other reviews like it, then be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. So until then, thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in 2025.